Good morning. This is Mr. Bruce. I'm so glad that you've clicked play here and that you get a chance to meet face to face, kind of. I printed my notes just a little bit ago, but somehow they got lost and I wasn't going to reprint them, so I'm going no notes on this one. Good luck. I hope it turns out. This is called the Trials of the Jeffersonians. The Jeffersonian presidents are Jefferson, Madison, and Monroe. After President James Monroe leaves office, we have a different set of ideals take the office, and we get a different brand. We call that Jacksonian. And they don't call themselves the Republicans anymore. They call themselves the Democrats. So we'll get to that later. Different set of series. We're going to focus today on the trials, particularly looking at the foreign policy issues that Jefferson had to face, as well as Madison, and look at how that shaped Monroe's office just a little bit. We're just going to just talk about Monroe as president just a touch at the end here, but particularly Jefferson and Madison. So we begin in the election of 1804. We know that Jefferson was elected president in 1800, a fiasco because the Electoral College kind of breaks down with the political parties. And so what we see here in 1804, the Federalists get 14 electoral votes to Jefferson's 162. Ouch. It's a pretty handed defeat. Remember the Federalist politics of the late 1790s with Adams as president really leaves a bad taste in the mouths of most Americans. And so what we see here on this map is a very astounding victory. And there will be one later that will be even more significant. Monroe's second presidency will be a larger margin of victory for the Democratic Republican Party. So we want to remember what else was going on at this time, right? So no longer is it just the French Revolution that we're dealing with. It's also what we call the Napoleonic Wars. From 1803 to 1815, this is a series of conflicts particularly between Britain and France. They each had allies. The allies here aren't worth noting too much, but the French land power, Napoleon's army was astoundingly devastating on land. He used the continental system of warfare. Feel free to look that up, and I'm not going to spend any time talking about it. But Britain's system was based on a naval blockade of Europe, and I want to focus on that because that's really what we had a big problem with, was the British Navy and their crippling and suffocating naval blockade. And a blockade is where you take a line of ships and you station them in a situation so that way they essentially form a barrier, a wall, a fence, and they don't let anybody through unless they are harassed or addressed by the Navy. And so the blockade, if you want to draw a line essentially from the Africa all the way around, Britain was able to make a blockade here, and they tried to suffocate France. France, meanwhile, because they couldn't get out the Atlantic Ocean with any of their naval ships, they had to focus on getting resources and such from North Africa. France effectively takes over a good portion of Egypt for some time for resources for its empire. But we see British control in those regions, and that made things very difficult for France. They essentially have France surrounded by water, and that is why they're able to defeat the French by 1815. Our economy it comes into play here because when we look at what we wanted to do, we learned in our textbook and in our work in class that we wanted to trade freely with Britain and France. That was kind of our lifeline. We sent over to them raw materials, particularly to Britain, and they, because of their manufacturing, they sent back finished goods. Our ships would go with raw materials. They'd sell them in England and in the rest of Europe, and they would buy finished goods to bring back to the United States and sell them here. That's our economy, and this Jeffersonian economic model fed into this nicely because he wanted the United States to be primarily based on agriculture, and if our agricultural model was to be promoted and effective, we needed an ability to buy finished goods from somewhere else because we're not going to be producing them here. That was Jefferson's model. That was Jefferson's mindset. However, when our ships went over to trade with any other country but England or Great Britain, our ships would be attacked, and the British the British would demand to board our vessels in search of sailors that they would claim were deserters from the British Navy, which meant that they escaped somehow from a British naval vessel and they found work or employment on some American ship, and so the British claim. They would search our ship, they would capture sailors, and they would force them into work on the British Navy. The British Navy needed thousands and thousands of ships that were filled with thousands and thousands of British sailors so that they could have an effective blockade to defeat the French. What comes into play later is that once the war with France is over, there is really not much of a need for impressment. We'll get to that in a little bit. But impressment is a big deal. This is one of the particular reasons why we go into the War of 1812. But Jefferson is not a war friend, right? However, with the Chesapeake-Leopold affair, the Leopard, USS Leopard, HMS Leopard in the USS Chesapeake, HMS referring to the British, His Majesty's ship, Leopard, requests to board the Chesapeake, which is a U.S. Merchant vessel, and the Chesapeake captain says no, and so there's a conflict, and American sailors died as a result of this conflict, and that's an act of war when a ship opens fire on a ship from another country. So as a result of that conflict, Jefferson feels he has to do something, and so he decides to encourage Congress to pass the Embargo Act of 1807. And an embargo is no trade, in or out. No ships go out of a American port to another country's seaports, and no other country's vessels come into ours. And the objectives here with Jefferson's Embargo Act was economic coercion. Jefferson recognized that there was no way we could negotiate with Britain and France, particularly with Britain. French Navy wasn't much of an issue at this time because they were so bogged down by the blockade as well. But when Jefferson recognized that the only way for us to have any sort of leg up or any sort of negotiation power, anything to negotiate with or from, something to say that, listen, we'll offer this, we can do this. We had nothing. Right? We had no way to negotiate with Britain and say, please stop attacking our ships. So his attempt here was with economic coercion. We could coerce them or force them by saying, we're going to cut off all trade with you. Therefore, you don't get any of our raw materials. And how are you going to produce your manufactured goods without our raw materials? Jefferson didn't understand that they didn't really need us as much as he thought they needed us. The other objective here was to avoid war. That was not something that Jefferson wanted to do. He recognized that he had just cut the Navy, he cut the Army. We don't have anything to go to war with. All of our Navy was involved in the Barbary Wars, fighting the Barbary pirates. So by avoiding war, we would get Britain to stop impressing American sailors without going to war. That was the idea here. The result was a catastrophic failure. Everybody in New England hates this, absolutely hates this. Because everyone in New England is involved with trade in some way. This doesn't really affect the farmers in the South too much. Yes, they have to find some other way to buy manufactured goods that are going to be more expensive because, British goods were just flooding American markets, and they were cheaper. Their manufactured products were far cheaper than ours because their systems were in place longer and were better. But so the Federalists absolutely loathe this Embargo Act, and for rightful causes. I mean, think about Boston. Boston is a harbor city. The city of Boston is surrounded by water. Everyone in Boston is dependent in some part, either directly or indirectly, to water-based industry and shipping and mercantilism, selling goods overseas and buying goods overseas and bringing them over here for sale. That's 90% of their income. And so Boston and other cities like New York, they're crippled by this. And Jefferson just doesn't quite figure that out. I love this cartoon, or this political cartoon that would have been featured in a pro-Federalist newspaper. We see the terrapin, the turtle here, represents the Embargo Act, and it's biting someone that's trying to sell his superfine whatever it is he's biting him on the butt, and this guy is just laughing. And the idea here is that this is a Republican, and this is just a upstanding merchant who wants to sell his goods overseas. So, as a result, we have a slightly larger disparity in our election of 1808. Right? No longer is it Jefferson. Okay, the Jefferson 2 terms are up here, and so in 1808 we have two different. We have a different Republican that's running for office. James Madison, the father of our Constitution, is going for the executive here, and we see that he gets still a significant victory. But look the states here that are now as a whole saying no thank you to the Republican president. These states here that are dependent, these New England states, dependent on trade, down here Delaware and this part of Maryland, saying no thank you. Even North Carolina, 3 votes from North Carolina go to a Federalist candidate, just frustrated with the Embargo Act. The Embargo Act does get repealed after this election, and so it's noteworthy to say that this election kind of forces Congress to act. It is also noteworthy that 6 votes went to an independent Republican, someone who doesn't associate himself with Madison. George Clinton comes from New York, and so he gets these votes over here. Okay. Now, also in this election, come up a couple rising stars. Actually, not this election, but the election of 1810. 2 rising stars are elected into the House of Representatives: Henry Clay of Kentucky and John C. Calhoun of South Carolina. These guys are from the South and from the West, and they say we need to tell Britain what's what, and we want to do that in the form of war. We think we should go to war with Great Britain because there is no other way for us to get what we need. These guys aren't concerned about shipping. These guys are concerned about the Federalists' wishes or desires. And so powerful are their ideas that when Henry Clay is elected to the House of Representatives, he is also elected to be their Speaker of the House, which is a guy that runs the show in the House of Representatives. He actually transforms that into a very powerful role, Henry Clay does. So only once in our history has that ever happened, where a rookie, a first-year congressman is also elected to the Speaker of the House. From then on, and every other time before and since, it's always a veteran that is elected to the Speaker of the House. John C. Calhoun, on the other hand, a very powerful, fiery, passionate proponent of states' rights. John C. Calhoun will argue also for war. He has and will serve a prominent role in a number of facilities. He will later serve as a vice president and I believe in the Senate as well. These guys have a long political career, well into the 1840s and 1850s. So those guys believe we should go to war, and part of the reason is that it's not just impressment on the sea, but it's also in the West, in the Indiana Territory. We have Indians over here that are forming a confederation. Tecumseh is a Native American chief, Shawnee, and he and his brother start a confederation where they start making significant alliances with numerous tribes and nations of Indians in the Western Territory, and they're going to resist American spread and American push west. They ally themselves with the British, and we don't know of this except for in the Battle of Tippecanoe in 1811. William Henry Harrison defeats Tecumseh's army. Tecumseh's brother, the Prophet, dies, and on the battlefield, after the battle is fought, they find guns that are British. So it's clear that the British have given these Indians weapons, and the accusation is made that the British are the ones that are behind all this in our West. They're the ones that are encouraging the Indians to start this uprising against the United States. So Madison, by June of 1812, this will be the year, the summer before Madison's re-election. Right, so this is Madison's 3rd year as president, and I want to take a look at a few snippets of his war message to see what he says. I gotta get my cursor out here. Come on, there it is. All right. So I want to go to Madison's war message. I think it's opening here. Good. Take a sip of coffee while I wait. Madison basically says three things in his speech here. He says, British cruisers have been in the continued practice of violating the American flag on the great highway of nations and seizing and carrying off persons sailing under it. They've also violating the rights and peace of our coasts. They hover over and harass our entering and departing commerce. He says, talks about down here. In reviewing the conduct of Great Britain toward the United States, our attention is just necessarily drawn to the warfare just renewed by the savages on one of our extensive frontiers, a warfare which is known to spare neither age nor sex, and to be distinguished by features particularly shocking to humanity. Right? When you're fighting Indians, it doesn't go the way that that white men know how to fight, and so the British are behind that also. Okay. Lastly, he says, we behold, in fine, right, in conclusion, on the side of Britain, a state of war against the United States, and on the side of the United States, a state of peace toward Great Britain. And he's like, this has got to change, right? That's got to change in his mind. So, in Madison's war message, clearly he's got three things, right? Provocations. The reasons why Great Britain needs to have something done to them is 1, the impressment of sailors, 2, cutting off the trade, and 3, inciting Indians on the frontier. These 3 reasons make it clear that we need to do something. And so in 1812, in this election, take a look at those that are in favor of Madison's actions and in favor of not Madison's actions, I guess. Right? So where was the War of 1812 supported by public opinion? In every state that voted for Madison. Right? All the states that are green are in support of Madison's view of war with Britain. But where is it not supported? Clearly in the states that are orange that vote for Clinton. Now, the fusion label here is not a separate party. What fusion means is that electoral votes were split between different parties for the purpose of not voting for the other candidate. It's a very confusing term, very confusing concept. It's not a separate political party. It just means that there aren't. Clinton's not a Federalist. It just means that that there are Federalist electors and Republican electors that are casting their vote for Clinton, and so it's not a Federalist candidate. That's basically what I wanted to say there. But anybody but Madison is kind of what the idea is with those two, with the other political parties being involved. But DeWitt Clinton is another New Yorker. The Clintonses and the DeWitts are very prominent political leaders in that state of New York. So you can see a bit more disparity with this war. And going back to the idea that the Federalists are against going to war with Britain for obvious reasons. That's going to hurt trade. But the Republicans aren't as concerned about that. All right. There are some strategic blunders of the War of 1812. I don't want to talk too much about the nature of the war, but I wanted to point out that we tried to invade Canada. It's unsuccessful, particularly because we don't have any ability to challenge Britain naval superiority, even on the Great Lakes. It's not until Oliver Hazard Perry builds a navy there that they're able to challenge the British, and they do so because their ships are newer and faster. But 1814, British attack Washington, set it on fire. It's madness. On August 24th, 1814, Washington D.C. is literally set fire to, and our Capitol building and the White House need to be evacuated. And it looks like things are just going worse. It wasn't until the Battle of Lake Champlain up here that we're able to score a significant victory and force the British to what's essentially a stalemate. Now, Fort McHenry, on the other hand, is a neat story from the war, and I like pointing it out because this fort is in Baltimore. It overlooks Baltimore. Baltimore, Maryland, is the capital of that state. Baltimore is way upriver, where the Chesapeake kind of pushes into. Go back to the map here. The Chesapeake down here is Baltimore. This is Chesapeake Bay. The British sail up Chesapeake Bay and go straight to Baltimore because that is a stronghold. and they bombard Fort McHenry. And look at this flag that flies from the inside of the fort, a humongous flag. The bombardment of Fort McHenry is astounding because over the course of the night, the British pound the fort with the attempt of crippling it, and they can't. They can't. And from the harbor, a lawyer named Francis Scott Key is taken captive because he tries to get someone else out of jail, essentially, and decides, and the British decide to hold him because they know that he knows what they're going to do, and so they don't want to release him. But he watches this from a British ship. He watches this bombardment, and as the bombs explode, he continues to see the flag through the smoke, through the darkness, and so he writes that poem, the Star-Spangled Banner. And the flag that flew over the fort, the flag that is noted as our Star-Spangled Banner, is still on display at the Smithsonian Museum of American History. You can see the holes here. They've all been patched up. This flag was almost lost, almost deteriorated to the point of being thrown out until it was grabbed up by the Smithsonian. They've preserved it in a really, really cool way. So when you go to Washington, D.C., make sure you stop there and pay your tribute to the Star-Spangled Banner and say your Pledge of Allegiance to that thing. That'll give you chills. So as the war ends, three things are happening at once. Number one, the Hartford Convention. We'll talk about that in just a second. The Treaty of Ghent being negotiated by John Quincy Adams, actually, in Belgium. And then the Battle of New Orleans. I'll talk about that separately also. The Hartford Convention is the Federalists' last-ditch attempt to say, we want something to go in our favor, please. The Federalists really had nothing to go for. They don't have any hope or any chance at regaining majority in the Congress, nor putting a Federalist president in the executive office. But this convention is where delegates from these New England states, not New York, but from New Hampshire, from Vermont to Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut, they all get together and they say, we want to see some changes happen. We want to see some amendments made to the Constitution. Where, who, and what, right? The hope was to amend the Constitution. They wanted to see a two-thirds vote of Congress in order to issue any sort of embargo, right? A supermajority to embargo again. A two-thirds supermajority to declare war, right? Madison was able to encourage just half of Congress to declare war, and that was enough. That was enough. And then two-thirds to admit new states. See, the Federalists don't want us to grow west. The Federalists want us to grow east. They want us to be more connected to the Atlantic Ocean through our trade. And they don't want any sort of conscription in the Army. Conscription is essentially a draft, meaning that the Congress can pass a law saying if we go to war, we are going to call citizens at random who are 18 and older for service in the Army. So those amendments are goals, are hopes. They don't ever actually happen, right? What the Hartford Convention is, according to this cartoon, is a good way to look at it, is one last leap towards Great Britain. One last leap towards the connection with Great Britain, militarily and economically. Now, the Treaty of Ghent, the Latin phrase that describes what happens as a result of this treaty is status quo ante bellum, which means that everything was, after the war, everything was put back to where it was before the war started. Right? Antebellum is the time before, the period before, and status quo is the way things were. And so that was what the Treaty of Ghent made clear. A very peculiar way to end a war, to say that nothing really changes. The Battle of New Orleans happens 2 weeks after the Treaty of Ghent is signed, January 8th, 1815. A significant battle, and we see the rise of a hero, Andrew Jackson, who will become president in a few years. Andrew Jackson leads an army, suggested that they inflict over 2,000 British casualties, almost 300 killed, but 1,300 wounded, and 500 run away. And our casualties here are only in the 70s. But a pretty decisive victory, and the decisiveness of this victory is what makes it so popular. Truly, he represents America in a pretty powerful way. Although the Battle of New Orleans took place after the Treaty of Ghent was signed, because it was important because of the decisive victory. It provided that sense of national pride. Right, that was one of the third outcomes of the War of 1812, and he becomes a hero. And in the election of 1816, Madison serves his 2 terms, And so the Democratic Republicans put forth Monroe, and this is the last election in which the Federalist Party participated in a national election. This is it. After 1816, the Federalists go away. They die. Again, that was another result of the War of 1812. No more Federalists. So we see 3 Federalist delegates here, 9, 22 from Massachusetts. So it gives them a total of 34 for Rufus King from New York, I believe. And what's interesting is Rufus King's from New York. Maybe he's from Massachusetts. Massachusetts. I'm gonna stick with it because I wanted to see if he's from New York. Why did New York only have 29, or why did New York vote completely for Republican? Interesting. Usually, a candidate gets a lot of votes from his home state. But anyways, 1816, Monroe is elected president, and as a result, Monroe desires to return us back to isolationism. Monroe enjoys a period of time when Americans are particularly American, and they feel American, and Monroe will have to deal with a very different kind of foreign policy dilemma as he takes the office. All right, so that's that. I always have to thank Mr. Tom Ritchie for making these slides. His slideshows are a little more advanced and good for AP US history, but he makes the slides, and I just reap the benefits being able to talk to you guys about them. So check his site out if you need to, if you'd like. Otherwise, I wish you a fantastic day, and check you back next time.